Now we compare the two, use case versus user story, that each offer a different approach to requirements or discovery phase. Use case removes ambiguity from language early on. It closes the deal in a contract-like text that all parties are obliged to follow after sign-off. It elevates the knowledge of discovery or requirement and enters into design territory in the UI section. That limits the choices of designer when it comes to user-system interaction. It is as if there is no alpha phase for, for the UI design as we dive into the first good idea that comes into mind during requirement study. Here's a question. Can we do use case in Agile or in Double? The answer is yes, we can do that. It is, however, not recommended. We have to use our discretion depending on the situation and uniqueness of a product or a project. In contrast, user story aims to avoid early and arbitrary closure on understanding of the requirement. It engages everyone in brainstorming a practice of exchange of idea. Instead of a finalized black and white text, it will end up with a language that is gradually understood by everyone and is gradually more associated to the working software. It taps into the mind of product owner, business, product manager, BAs, designers, developers, testers, user experience designers in a framework that accepts change even late in the game. And by keeping the conversation going, it tries to avoid the rigidity in design, a rigidity that could be premature. Use case assumes that language is a value neutral and objective tool in and of itself. And by writing clear terms in steps, it aims to create a working software exactly based on requirement. In contrast, user story alters the language through conversation. Every time after each discussion in our multidisciplinary team, we reach a new negotiated meaning and our user story gets updated and go through a even more evolution. And through that, it gets more aligned with the working software and closer to the code, and inherent conflict and contradictions are removed from the language. Let's go back to a basic definition. Language is a practice or the practice of meaning making, and that meaning is aimed to be understood equally by everyone in a social group. That is not usually achieved easily. In writing, reading, speaking, or listening, there are always a source or the speaker or story maker, and there is an audience, the other person, and then there is an interaction takes place. Therefore, things could fall into the gap and not get across. In technical conversations, we are bound by the same limitation in language as always, yet in these kinds, we need even more clarity. In agile conversation, the objective is to achieve more in quality and innovation with a stress on both words, and save more through exchange of ideas. This is based on the principle in Agile Manifesto that face-to-face conversation will do wonder. But in that conversation, we have a clear objective. We don't want to go all over the place. The, the more crisp and focused the language gets through conversation as it continues, we achieve more in result. Agile conversation makes language unambiguous, crisp, concise, minimal, and let's add actionable because it gets closer and reflects better the characteristics and features of the working software itself, the code. Now, can template do the same? Well, a template is not a substitute for those conversations. If it is used as a substitute for conversation to achieve clarity quickly and early, then maybe that is at least part of a good number of patches that we have to apply once the software go live. Continuing our discussion on storytelling and story listening, activities that start in discovery but do not end there. After enough listening and a good comprehension of business activities, then we put the first version of our user story down in writing. When a user story comes to life on paper during story drafting or story mapping, from that point on, it is only waiting to get better, expanded, modified, refined, and get more comprehensive and reflects all the aspects of that function or feature. Events that update our user stories, for example, are not limited to making a prototype, elimination of some hypothesis, development discussions that change one or other algorithms, design decisions that change the UI, feedback from business during sprint demo that is implemented, defect resolution, and its consequences. As the text of our user story changes, alters, expands, it is actually our glossary that is undergoing a change. It is the definition of words, terms, events, roles, etc. that are changing. It is our common language that are going through a modification, the ubiquitous language. As we sat down with business during discovery and started with open-ended question and acting as good listeners, we were learning that common language, a language that belonged to the problem domain or problem space. At that time, our user stories were just a placeholder, were skeleton user stories. Then the change in the text of our user story in the next phases means that our common language gets more and more unambiguous. This is the language, that common language that belongs to solution domain or solution space. It is not developed on the air. In fact, as we go on, it gets closer and closer and reflect better and better the characteristic of working software, our solution, the product. As we move from one activity to another and from one sprint to the next, it is our duty to ensure that the language used in user stories and in all other Agile documents truly reflect the activities of in the multidisciplinary team. Decisions, agreements, negotiated meanings, and the language is more accurate, detailed, yet minimal, crisp, uninterpretable, unambiguous, and even actionable, as it represents the working software in a true sense. In fact, it should be a copy of our working software, this one in human language. One could wonder which copy will outlast the other. When the working software is decommissioned sometimes in the future, this copy could continue to contribute toward the next generation of our products. The unambiguous common language, that is.